Welcome to the Fibromyalgia Podcast. I'm Tami Stacklehouse, Fibromyalgia Coach, author, and founder of the International Fibromyalgia Coaching Institute. The goal of this podcast is to empower you with access to the dream team of experts and coaches I've discovered are key to living the fibro life you love. From the comfort of your own home, and maybe even your pajamas, I'll help you take back control of your life and health. To help out with fibro fog, I always include full show notes and additional resources at fibromyalgiapodcast.com. Welcome to the Fibromyalgia Podcast. I'm your coach, Tami Stacklehouse, and this is episode 157. Have you ever wanted your life or your health to change, but at the same time, you weren't actually ready to change anything? Maybe you felt like you were getting ready to be ready. Maybe you feel like it's going to be too hard to change your fibromyalgia symptoms and it feels like too big of a mountain to climb. You're not prepared. So you just decide to wait and you don't even start. If any of that sounds familiar, this episode is for you. Today, I'm diving deeper into the struggle that we all have of wanting to feel better and at the same time, not really wanting to change ourselves, our habits, or our lives. Believe me, I have been there. And to be honest, in some areas of my life, I am still there. And if I'm honest in those areas, then I know I'm just not ready. Like I'm not ready to change this thing, even though the thing bugs me, right? So today, I'm going to be sharing a story with you that I think about often, actually, whenever I feel like I'm stuck in that place of wanting to change, but not wanting to change. I think about this story, and I'm going to share that with you. It's a story from the early days of my struggle to feel better. It was one of those moments that actually changed everything, a moment where I got a little divine help. I'm also going to talk about why all of us are resistant to change, the stages that we go through when we're trying to make a change, and we'll end with some practical tips that you can use to get started right now, even if you don't feel ready, maybe even especially if you don't feel ready. As always, I do want to remind you that the information that you hear is not meant to be considered medical advice, and it is not intended to replace consulting with a qualified physician or other healthcare provider. There may be reasons that you shouldn't start with something just yet, and there may be reasons why you need to wait. So if there are things in this episode, if there are things that maybe it inspires you to try making some changes, make sure you talk with your providers if it's something that they need to know about. So let me take you back. This was back in 2009. I had been diagnosed with fibromyalgia in 2007. So this was a couple years into my journey. I had realized that I needed to change some things or my life was just going to be a downward spiral. I knew I was going to need to change actually a lot of stuff. I talked with my doctor about it. She actually referred me to a health coach. I hired my first coach and we started working on things like my sleep habits, my diet, how I was using the energy that I do have. And in the middle of starting to work on that, I ended up having to need my wisdom teeth removed. And after they were removed, I ended up with dry socket. So I thought I was going to just temporarily only be able to eat soft food, but it ended up being a whole lot longer. And so the diet that I was trying to follow, which was more of a keto diet, meat and veggies, those aren't so good when you're trying to recover from dry socket and having your wisdom teeth removed. Then after those got healed up and I was like, okay, we're ready to go. I can get back on plan. I ended up with a sinus infection and I was just super sick, super nauseous. Nothing sounded good. I wanted to eat like toast. Again, not very keto, right? And I remember having this thought, oh, I am just going to wait until this is over. Like, what is the point of trying to do this now? And it was as if the voice of God spoke to me and said, waiting until you feel better to start working on your health is like waiting until you're in shape before you start to exercise. And that just hit me like a ton of bricks, right? It just doesn't work that way. We don't feel good. That is why we want to work on our health. That's why we want to work on improving ourselves. And so if we wait until we feel better, we are never going to feel better. It's like waiting until you're in shape before you start to exercise. It's the doing the exercise that gets you in shape, right? It just doesn't work that way. So let's apply that and that idea of change, which is why this episode is called Start Before You're Ready. We have to start before we are where we want to be. That's just how it works. You could pick anything in life, any journey, any goal. You know where you want to go. You have to start before you get there. All right. So some of the things that I hear from people as I am doing consultations, as I am chatting with people through email or social media, the two things that I hear most often from people saying that they want to wait is either I'm not that sick or I'm too sick. So it kind of covers the whole gamut. I'm either, oh, I'm not that bad. I can do this on my own. I'm not that bad. Or, oh, I am so sick. I've got to get a little bit better before I can even utilize this work. I want to talk about those here for a minute because this is flawed logic. As I said before, it's that idea of waiting until you're there before you even start the journey. It doesn't work like that. And so to quote one of my students who graduated a couple years ago, she said, I was too sick to take this class, but if I hadn't taken the class, I wouldn't have gotten better. And I think that kind of sums it all up. You might be feeling terrible and not have the capacity to do a lot of things. But that doesn't mean you can't get started because there are a lot of tiny baby steps that we can take. Speaking of baby steps, I saw a meme on Facebook just this week where somebody was talking about baby steps being the easy, simple, tiny steps. And that's true. We are talking about small, tiny steps. But if you think about a baby's first steps, they're jerky, they're falling down, like it's not a pretty thing. So when we talk about baby steps, we need to talk about both the tiny steps, but also the willingness to do it wrong. One of my favorite quotes from Martha Beck, who, by the way, also has fibromyalgia. One of my favorite quotes from her, forgive me if I'm just paraphrasing and this is not accurate quote, but she basically says anything worth doing is worth doing wrong. Because in order to do it, we have to do it wrong. That's how we learn. Van Gogh has a quote, something along the lines of, I do things every day that I'm bad at so that I can get better at them. And that is the attitude that we need to start adopting, right? Maybe you feel like you're not that sick and you can get better on your own. And if that's working for you, awesome. However, again, that old quote, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. Maybe you feel like your fibromyalgia isn't all that bad, and maybe it isn't. But if you don't change something, your fibromyalgia won't change either. Fibromyalgia is not something that just spontaneously resolves. It's not like the cold or the flu where we just need to let it run its course. No, we have to change things. We have to actively engage in doing things that are going to improve our health. And so if you're feeling on that end of, oh, well, I'm not that bad, I can wait. you can't wait. I mean, yes, you can wait. You can do whatever you want to do. But if you wait, that doesn't mean it's going to get better. You are actively going to have to do something to improve your fibromyalgia. And on the other end of things, maybe you're feeling like you're too sick to get started. Well, the answer there is really just to break it down into even smaller, tinier pieces and to engage a lot more support. If you are so sick and your brain fog is so bad that you are just overwhelmed with everything, you can't make decisions, then you need somebody to come alongside you to help you think through those things and create those baby steps and help hold you accountable and strategize for how you're actually going to do it. You need that extra support if you are that sick. And remember what my student said, I was too sick to take this class, but if I hadn't taken this class, I wouldn't be feeling better. Now, the resistance to change, we all feel this. Everyone does not like change. And we can develop the sense of change. There are some of us that we actually can thrive in that environment. And if that's you, this next part won't apply to you. Feel free to fast forward. But for most people, that resistance to change is really just our brains trying to protect us. It could be conscious, where you're actually thinking, I need to protect myself from this change, or it could be completely unconscious. Maybe it's something that you actually want to change, but you find yourself sabotaging yourself. That is that unconscious resistance to change, where our brains are trying to protect us. Our brains could be repeating some of those protective voices from our past. Our parents who might be saying things like, oh, be careful, be careful. Or it might be negative voices from our past, those voices that say, oh, you can't do that. Your brain could also be protecting you because of your Fibromyalgia Wellness Style. And if you haven't taken the Fibromyalgia Wellness Style quiz, I'll have a link in today's show notes. It's just fibroquiz.com, but we'll have a link in today's show notes where you can go take that quiz. It's a free quiz, and you can sign up for a free series of tips, emails that will be sent to you over a series of a week or so, and give you tips for how to better manage your fibromyalgia based on your Fibromyalgia Wellness Style. But the different Fibromyalgia Wellness Styles have different challenges. For me, I'm a playmaker, which means exactly what you think it means. I am all about the fun. I am all about the interesting. And so when my brain tries to protect me, it's usually trying to protect me from the things that are boring or the things that aren't fun. So that's going to be things like going to bed on time, brushing my teeth, going to the dentist to have my teeth cleaned. Those things are not fun. They are not interesting. And I am just not interested in doing them. And so my brain tells me things like, oh, let's do this instead. That'll be way more fun. That's my brain trying to protect me from the boring or the unfun. Depending on your Fibromyalgia Wellness Style, and this information does come as part of those email tips, so make sure you sign up for it. There are specific challenges that you will have, ways that your brain will try to protect you. And if you take that quiz, sign up for those emails, I will definitely tell you what your challenges are. The other thing is that we are struggling with changing our habits and our routines, right? We do life our way. And in order to change the outcome, we need to change what we're doing. And that can feel super hard. You might have your groove. You might have the things that you enjoy. To be totally honest, I said going to bed on time is one of the things I always struggle with. I enjoy my time at night when the house is quiet and the lights are low. I enjoy that time by myself. Giving that up to try to go to bed earlier doesn't sound fun. Again, playmaker speak, right? It doesn't sound fun. So how do we shift that? One of my favorite quotes from a potential client, somebody that I was talking to about whether or not coaching was a good fit for her, One of the things that she asked me was, do I have to give up chocolate and coffee to work with you? And I love that question. Do I have to give up chocolate and coffee to work with you? It just says so much, right? I mean, for one thing, with fibromyalgia, we have already given up a lot. We may have lost careers or hobbies or even friends and family members because of our fibromyalgia. And so we don't want to give anything else up. It also has this feeling of these are some of the only things I can enjoy anymore. And I don't want to give up the last few things that I can enjoy, the last few pleasures, or the last few comforts of my life. The other thing that it says to me is exactly what we're talking about today, that resistance to change. I like chocolate and coffee. I'm not sure I want to give those up because I enjoy them. It might feel too hard. Maybe there's a little bit of coffee and chocolate addiction, right? We don't want to give those things up. And I think that one question, again, just really epitomizes that struggle that we all have of wanting to feel better, but also resisting the change. And one of the things that my husband Scott says that I think is so great, we were actually talking about me writing my books. And he says, I want to have written a book, but I don't want to write a book. And I love that difference between I want to have done a thing, but I don't want to necessarily do the thing, right? Maybe you want to be in shape, but you don't want to exercise. Maybe you want to have your fibromyalgia under control, but you don't want to figure out how to pace yourself. You don't want to say no to the things that you love. A lot of us are basically saying the same thing that he said, which is, I want to accomplish this thing. I want to have this thing, but I don't necessarily want to do the work to get me from here to there. And acknowledging that, that's actually the first step, is realizing that you even have that thought. So let's talk about the stages of change. The stages of change model is something that I think can help us recognize where we are and maybe help us know what the next step is. There are 6 steps, 6 stages, and the first one is something called pre-contemplation. So breaking that word down, pre meaning before, contemplation meaning to think about it. We're saying this is the stage before you're even thinking about it. So in many cases, you're not even aware that something even needs to be changed, right? You're not thinking about it. You're not aware of it. It's not on your radar. And to be honest, if you're listening to this podcast, you're probably not at that stage, at least not with your fibromyalgia. You might be somewhere else, but not with your fibromyalgia. You are at least at the point where you're thinking about it, which means you've moved beyond pre-contemplation. The second stage is contemplation, right? We're thinking about it. You've realized that you need to change. You're thinking about that change, but you're not necessarily acting on it yet. You're more of a passive participant, which is kind of a contradiction, right? You are just sort of letting it wash over you. You're listening to this podcast. So you could be in the stage of contemplation if you're just sort of letting my words wash over you. It's interesting, it's encouraging, it makes you feel less alone, but you're not actually thinking about making changes yet. Or maybe you are wondering about making changes, but you're not actually acting on those thoughts yet. That's contemplation. The third stage is called preparation. And it's exactly what you think that word means, right? You're going to be acting soon. You're going to be starting to change something soon. So you're in the stage now where maybe you're planning or you're researching or you're starting to make small changes. If we go to that idea of, you can't wait until you're in shape before you start to exercise. This might be things like you go and you sign up for the gym, or you go and you get new tennis shoes, or whatever that might be. So if this is your fibromyalgia, preparation might be listening to this podcast, right? This podcast could be part of your planning, your researching, your preparing. The next stage, the fourth stage, is where we take action. That's the name of the stage, action. We are actively starting to implement those changes. And some of you are in this stage because maybe you hear something on the podcast and you think, oh, yeah, I should talk to my doctor about that. And you make the appointment and you have the conversation. Or maybe you think, she's right. I should make this change. And you actually start to implement it. So some of you could be in the action stage. I would bet, though, that most of you are probably in that preparation stage and you need to start taking action. So our step number 4 is action, where you're actively implementing those changes. The fifth stage, this is maintenance, right? So in the action stage, we make the changes. And then in the maintenance stage, what we're doing is we're working to sustain that change over time to make sure that we don't fall into our old habits. So again, going back to our exercise example, maybe you have started going to the gym, you are doing whatever it is that you do for exercise. I personally love reformer Pilates, and you want to maintain that. It would be real easy to let life get in the way and not go. If we're talking about your fibromyalgia, maybe you have started learning how to pace yourself better. Maintenance is where we sustain that again over time. And we want to make sure we have enough support during this time, because it is very easy to find ourselves in stage number 6, which is relapse. This is where we fall into old behaviors. This will especially happen during stressful times in your life. So to give you some examples, what I see with our clients, the preparation stage, sometimes that is where somebody might schedule a consultation with a coach. Because, of course, the pre-contemplation stage, you're not even thinking about it, right? Contemplation is when you start thinking about it. Maybe you start listening to this podcast. Your preparation stage is when you start looking at, okay, well, what would it look like to work with a coach? Who would I want to work with? Maybe you start listening to some of our interviews with our coaches. Maybe you do a consultation. And then in the action stage, this is where you start working with your coach and you start actively implementing those changes. One of the things that I see too often with our clients is that once they start that action stage and they start making those changes, they think they're good to go. But that's only the middle of the process. Once we start taking action, that is great. That is a very important step. If we don't take action, nothing changes, right? But then we have to maintain it. And so one of the things that we like to do with our clients is to work with you through a full calendar year. Now, sometimes we can't do that, whether it's finances or life situation or whatever. There may be reasons why we can't do that, but that is our goal as coaches, is to work with you for a full calendar year. And the reason for this is exactly what I'm talking about with relapse, where you can fall into old behaviors during stressful times. So let me give you some examples, some things that I've seen. I have had clients where I started working with them this time of year. If you're listening to this after the fact, it's end of March. We're fully heading into spring. I work with them for 3 months. We get them into the summer. Everything is going great. And then when winter comes around, that cold weather, all of a sudden there are symptoms that come back. You can do okay when you're warm, but as soon as it gets cold, as soon as there's less sunlight, your seasonal affective disorder might flare up and depression is worse, and all of a sudden you don't feel good anymore. Another example is kind of just the opposite. Maybe you do great managing your fibromyalgia while your kids are in school. But as soon as that summer break comes around and you've got to figure out what to do with these kids and all the extra activities, then your carefully cultivated habits during the school year just completely fall apart because you don't have that same time to manage yourself. There can also be anniversaries. These can be both good anniversaries and bad anniversaries. So I believe that even if our brains aren't remembering some of these things, the cells in our bodies do. So my sister passed away back in 2016 in June. And I have learned that I need to block off the week before and after the anniversary of her death to give myself some extra space. Because even if I'm not consciously aware of the fact, it's going to be what is this? Going to be the 9th anniversary of her death, my body remembers. And so I notice that I start to be more tired. I start to have a little bit more depression. I start to have more brain fog. I start to feel less motivated. And so we have to work around these things. It could even be happy anniversaries, right? Like maybe you do great until it's your birthday and everything falls apart with the birthday cake and everything else, right? Or maybe it's even just holidays, right? Maybe you do great all year round. And then as soon as we hit Halloween, right? That's when the candy season starts. And we've got Halloween, and then we've got Thanksgiving, and then we've got Christmas, and then we've got New Year's, and then we've got Valentine's Day, and then we've got Easter candy. Oh my goodness, right? If sugar is a trigger for you, that's half the year right there. And so when we work with our clients for a full calendar year, that means we get to go through all of those things and teach you how to stay on track, how to manage your fibromyalgia through all of it. And so I think it's really important to understand that the stages of change don't end with taking action. Taking action is just the middle of the process. Once we start to take action, we need to make plans for how we're going to maintain that and how we're going to avoid falling into relapse. So just looking at my own story, just to give you another concrete example, I was diagnosed with fibromyalgia in 2007. And in 2009, as I said at the beginning, that's when I hired my first coach. And as I started working with her, things were pretty simple. We were focusing on my fibromyalgia. It was basically my full-time job. I had filed for disability, so I wasn't working. It was my full-time job. And then my wisdom teeth, and then the dry socket, and then the sinus infection. And that very easily it did put me into that relapse phase again. And so I had to start over. One of the things that I realized as I was in that relapse stage was that it had a purpose too. And one of the purposes for me was learning that just because I relapse doesn't mean it's over. Specifically, I was trying to be gluten-free. I was on this, keto diet, and every weekend we'd end up going to the movies, and I would have popcorn and candy and a soda and all the things you have at the movies, right? I would fall off the wagon, so to speak, right? I'd have that relapse. And the thing that I had to learn was just because I went to the movies on Friday night doesn't mean that I have to wait until Monday morning to start up again, right? I could have a small relapse and immediately go back to taking action. That was actually something that I practiced. Starting the thing, taking the action, that is not necessarily something that I struggle with. In some areas of my life, sure, I do. But I wanted this change. So taking action was fine. What was a struggle was feeling like, oh, well, I screwed it up. Might as well wait until Monday. My sister and I used to joke we were going to write a diet book titled Starting Monday. Because we said that so often. We'll start on Monday, right? We'll have the weekend, do whatever we want. We'll start on Monday. And so one of the things I had to learn was that I didn't have to wait till Monday to start again. I could go to the movies Friday night and start Saturday morning, right? So for you, I want you to think about those stages of change and think about where you are. Again, pre-contemplation, not even aware of it or not even thinking about it. That's probably not where you are with your fibromyalgia because you're here, you're listening to me. So of course you're thinking about it. There might be people in your life, people that you know who have fibromyalgia who aren't even thinking about it. And we can't make somebody move to a new stage. So if you do know somebody who's in pre-contemplation, who's not aware of it or thinking about the changes that they need to make, sure, you could recommend this podcast to them, but you can't move them from pre-contemplation to contemplation. So pre-contemplation, you're not even aware, you're not thinking about it. That's probably not you. Contemplation, you could be in contemplation if you are listening to this podcast, if you are starting to realize that maybe there's some things that you need to change, but you're not actually taking action yet. So you're just kind of letting my voice wash over you, but it's not inspiring change in you. You're just sort of letting it marinate. And there is nothing wrong with being in contemplation. This is one of the stages. But eventually, if we want things in our life to change, we need to move through these stages. So if you find yourself in contemplation, your next stage is going to be preparation. Now, you will be in preparation if you are here listening to the podcast and actually planning out the actions that you can take from what you learn here. So listening to the podcast is part of your research process, right? You're listening to this podcast with the intention of getting new information. You're starting to maybe make some small changes. Maybe you're starting to plan, depending on your personality, your wellness style. You might be someone who needs to plan first, or you might be someone who needs to research first. Preparation is when you start to do that. The next stage after preparation is action. This is where you are actively implementing changes. And some of you might be here. Most of you, my guess is that you're in the preparation stage, but some of you might also be in the action stage. Maybe you are a quick start like me, if you know the Colby A assessment. We take action. That's what we do. We do our research, but then we take action. And we understand that part of how we learn things is how we take action. And that might be you listening to this podcast and being like, oh, okay, I'm going to try that thing. The next stage is that maintenance. So you could be potentially in maintenance if you're somebody who has figured out how to manage your fibromyalgia and you just need to maintain it, right? This is where I am. I am in maintenance. Yes, my fibromyalgia is in remission, but I also can't go back to all my old bad habits, right? I can't go back to no sleep, lots of stress, pushing myself too hard, eating all the wrong things. That will move me into relapse from my remission. So I'm in maintenance, right? And many of you might be here. Those of you who are listening, who are graduates of my training programs, or maybe old clients, you might be in maintenance. And this podcast helps you stay in maintenance. And then there might be some of you who have relapsed. Maybe you had your fibromyalgia figured out a while ago and it's not anymore. Usually because something changed in your life. A lot of the things that I hear are things like, I was doing great and then I moved. I was doing great and then I had a baby. I was doing great and then I got sick with a different illness and then just never recovered, like maybe got COVID. So there's usually a trigger for that relapse. Sometimes it's just, if you're a playmaker, you probably got bored doing all the things that you have to do just to maintain how you feel. I always say I would not still be in remission if I wasn't a coach, because it's the thing that keeps me on the straight and narrow. So identify where you are in those stages of change and think about what the next stage is. If you're in contemplation, you want to move to preparation. If you're in preparation, your next step is to actually take action. If you're taking action, start to think about how you're going to maintain that. Maintenance is the only one where we don't think about how we're going to go into relapse. Maintenance, the whole purpose of it is to not relapse. So we'll give you a pass there. But think about where you are and think about how you can move into the next stage. So if you are in maintenance, then maybe one of the things to do is to think about the areas of your life where you're in pre-contemplation, where you're not aware of the changes that you need to make, and then start to move into contemplation. Maybe you've got your fibro totally managed. We need to talk about something else. Maybe you have other areas of your life totally managed, and we need to improve a specific area of your fibro life. I recently did this actually about, 6 months ago, 9 months ago. I realized that I was not getting the level of deep sleep that I wanted to get. My fibromyalgia is in remission, yes, and I'm getting a good amount of sleep a night, around 8 hours of sleep a night. But when I look at the percentage of that was actually deep sleep, it wasn't as much as I would like. And so I went back to contemplation, to preparation, to taking action on improving this specific area of my health. So if you're in maintenance, think about what other little things can you start to improve? Once we realize where we are and we identify the next stage that we need to move to, we need to eventually take action, right? Waiting for the point when you're ready is counterproductive, right? There are so many sayings out there I could quote to you, right? Like waiting until all the lights turn green. If you waited until all the lights turned green, you'd never leave your house. Or waiting until you're in shape before you start to exercise, or waiting until you feel better before you start to work on your health. It just doesn't work that way. And so eventually we are going to be needing to start before we're ready. This is especially true for our people who like to be super prepared. I used to be this person. I remember once my sister and I had signed up for a swing dance class. I know I've mentioned this on the podcast before, but we signed up for a swing dance class, and I was stressing out over the fact that I had never done this before. We were going to a class. I didn't want to make a fool out of myself. And I think I even said something like, I just wish I could learn the steps before we go. And my sister just busted up laughing. And she's like, okay, you want to learn how to do the dance before you go to the class that's going to teach you how to do the dance. And I'm like, actually, yes. I mean, when she put it like that, of course, it sounds so ridiculous. But how often in our lives are we doing that? We don't want to feel like a failure. We don't want to fall on our faces. We don't want to make a fool out of ourselves. We want to know how to do the thing and do it perfectly before we even start. But it's the starting that helps us figure out how to do it, right? And so we need to start now wherever we are. It is the only way that you're going to feel better. So what we do is we start to take small steps, things that you can do right now today. I'm going to give you just some examples, and then I'm going to break down the process of kind of how you're going to get started. So some small steps that you could take right now today might be things like making sure you're drinking enough water, making sure you're getting more sleep, asking for help more often, saying no more often, telling people how you really feel instead of just putting that perfect face on. One of the things that you can do is you can start with an exercise. I give all my clients, this is actually something I always assign with the very first lesson. Actually, I assign it before then. I assign it orientation, is to start writing your body's owner's manual. I did a whole podcast episode on this. This is episode 47. We'll have a link in today's show notes. Just go to fibromyalgiapodcast.com/157 for today's show notes, and we'll have a link to that. But this is where you start making a note of the things that you know your body needs. I won't go into that whole lesson right now. You can listen to that episode to learn more. One of the other steps that you can take right now is just to schedule a consultation, talk to a coach. A lot of times we feel so overwhelmed, we don't know what steps to take, we don't know how to break things down, but we know. You might not know, but as coaches, we know. That is our whole job. So we can help you actually break that down, get started, how to change your thought patterns, how to change your habit patterns, and to actually change that. So here are some tips for how to get started when you don't feel ready. So break the process down. We want to break it down into really manageable steps. And the first step is always awareness. Remember, pre-contemplation, we're not even aware of it. Contemplation, we become aware of it. So we need to start with that awareness. And that might simply be paying attention to, when do you feel like going to bed? When do you actually wake up? How much sleep are you actually getting? How does your body feel when you get stressed? Pay attention to the reasons why maybe you're not drinking water. One of the things I realized was I do great if there's water right next to me and I can drink it. But if that bottle runs out, then I don't drink any more water. So for me, one of the first little baby steps I took was simply to get a larger bottle. If I had a 24-ounce water bottle or a 16-ounce water bottle and I moved to a 32-ounce water bottle, well, that automatically means I'm going to get 1 to 2 cups more water because it's right there and the bottle has still got water in it, so I'm going to drink it, right? So start to pay attention. I also want you to identify one thing to change and make sure you break that down to one actionable thing. We're not going to say, fix your sleep. Fibro sleep is complicated. There is so much that goes into that. That is too big a problem to solve, right? So break it down into one thing. And maybe that one thing, if we're talking about sleep, maybe that one thing is having a bedtime routine. Or maybe that one thing is making sure everything is ready for you to go to bed. What I mean by that is, that it's inviting, that you, that sounds yummy, right? So identify one thing to change. Then, because you still have to take action and that can still be hard, right? We need to go through that preparation stage before we can move from contemplation to action. We need to go through preparation. One of the things that you can do is you can brainstorm. What kind of support are you going to need to make this change? And actually ask yourself the question, what do I need to be ready to make this change? And don't edit your responses. Like, pretend like you're dictating whatever your brain says and just do a brain dump, right? So ask yourself that question. What do I need to be ready? And write down everything that comes to you. You can always edit it later, but write down whatever comes to you. And don't disregard the little things. And once I was doing a office spa day workshop where we were working on cleaning up our offices, and the person leading it asked that question, what do you need to be ready? And what I wrote down was light a candle and have a cookie. But there was something about that process, have a cookie was probably like, okay, maybe my blood sugar is dipping and I need to have a snack. Sometimes the answer will look like I need a nap and a cookie, like you're a little kid. But really what your brain is telling you is you're tired and your blood sugar is low. So, how do you give yourself what you need to be ready? Maybe the answer that you get is, I don't know enough to even know what action to take. Okay, well, what do we need to know about? How do we start researching that? And start to put those pieces in place. This is going to vary a bit depending on your personality, your Colby A, on your Fibromyalgia Wellness Style. Some of you will need to make a plan, like literally write out a step-by-step plan. Some of you will need to do the research. You might need to talk to people that you trust, ask their opinion, get more information from them. But at some point, you are going to have to start before you have all the answers, because ultimately this is how you figure out those answers. And so one of the things that you can do is to give yourself permission to try, quote, try, without being tied to the outcome. So often we are only giving ourselves permission to do and not permission to try. And I'm starting to feel like Yoda here, do not try. We actually need to do the opposite. We need to give ourselves permission to try, not do. And what I mean by that is, I don't know if acupuncture is going to help you feel better or not. Go try it. Give yourself permission to do something without being tied to the outcome, without it having to mean that it works, right? You are going to try things that don't work. That is part of the process. That is how we figure out what does work. And so cultivating this idea that life is a science experiment. When you do a science experiment, we start with a hypothesis. We have an idea of what we think might happen. So again, we'll go back to my acupuncture idea here. Maybe you do your research. Maybe you understand how acupuncture is supposed to help with fibromyalgia. Maybe you do your research, talk to a few people, get some referrals to people who are good. But eventually you have to actually make that appointment and go try it and see what happens. That's the next step in that science experiment. We try the thing and then we gather information, right? So there is no failure. There is no, oh, I failed. We just learned something. The goal is to learn, okay, if I go and I do acupuncture, how do I feel afterwards? You're not looking for the magic bullet that is going to cure you. There is no such thing. It's going to be a bunch of little things all added together. And some of these things we won't even know for maybe months if it works. If you're trying something like low-dose naltrexone, you got to give it at least 6 months to even know if it's helping you. So at some point, we have to start. Now, once you do start, once you set those small goals, those baby steps, those tiny but jerky falling down steps, then we are going to experience some resistance, right? Our brain is still going to try to protect us. So when you go to that acupuncture appointment and maybe it's not quite what you expected, your brain is probably going to say things like, well, I told you that wasn't going to work. Your brain is just trying to protect you from disappointment, from failure, from pain, physical or emotional. And we just need to tell our brains, thank you. Thank you for protecting me. I understand what you're trying to do. And thank you. And I got it. This is what we're doing. We are going to keep trying this until we find something. And you can't fail if it's an experiment. If you are trying and not doing, right? The goal is learning. The goal isn't fibromyalgia in remission. The goal is to learn what helps you feel better, to go back and to write it in your body's owner's manual and to make a note of that, right? So picking yourself up, trying again, treating yourself like you would treat your best friend or your child, right? To say, hey, it's okay. Let's try again, right? Anything that you learn how to do, learn how to play the piano, learn how to ride a bike, learn how to drive a car. You're not going to do it perfectly from day one. Me going to that swing dancing class, the point my sister was trying to make. You're not going to do it perfectly. Everybody out there, everybody in the world, when they are doing something new, they're going to mess up. That's just part of how we learn. And it's the same thing with managing your fibromyalgia. So the lesson is to pick yourself up and to keep going, even when you slip into relapse, right? When you fall off the wagon, when you don't do things perfectly, or you do things and it doesn't work. So I'm going to use a really silly analogy here, but this is what I want you to think of when you think about trying new things for your fibromyalgia. When you are learning how to drive a car, you're going to learn how to drive. You could read the owner's manual. You could even learn how the engine works. You could do research, watch videos, even learn how to build an engine yourself. Right? You could take the whole car apart. You could put it all back together. You could watch videos. You could go to training classes. I think most of us have gone to driver's ed, right? Where you sit in class and they teach you about all the things. None of that actually fully prepares you for getting behind the wheel. It doesn't matter how old you are. I have a friend who learned to drive when she was older, like 50s, 60s. So it doesn't matter if you're, a teenager or if you're older, when you're learning how to drive, the first time you get behind that steering wheel and it is all up to you, you're the person who's pushing the gas pedal. You're the person who's pushing the brake. You're the person who's turning the steering wheel. I think if you think back to when you learned how to drive, you'll remember that moment where you felt like the car was out of freaking control, right? And you are barely holding it on the road and you were maybe going 20 miles an hour. Maybe it was even 15 miles an hour, right? You're not going to do it perfectly. It's why we practice in safe places. We have to eventually get behind the wheel of the car in order to actually learn how to drive. All those other things, they could be helpful. Some of your brains may need that information to help you understand things better. But ultimately, we have to take the action. We have to take the action. We have to do something. And again, with your fibromyalgia, it's the same thing. You can read all the books. You can listen to all the podcasts. You can go to all the events, watch all the webinars. At the end of the day, you are not going to know what's going to help you feel better until you try it and it either works or it doesn't. This is where I think working with a coach can be so helpful. We all have fibromyalgia ourselves, which means we went through this ourselves for our own fibromyalgia. We know the struggle. We know the stress inside you, the thoughts that you're thinking. We've experienced that. And even more, we have experienced a lot of those things ourselves. I purposely make sure that I try pretty much anything that I recommend to my clients so I can tell them about the experience. Now, my fibromyalgia is in remission. I can't necessarily tell you if I go try a brand new therapy that nobody's ever heard of yet. I can't necessarily tell you how that's going to affect my pain because I don't have any, but I can tell you what that experience was like. And because of our research, because of our training, because of all the clients that we work with, and our whole community of coaches who share their experiences, we have a good idea of what is likely to work for you. So we know the research on fibromyalgia and what has been proven to help fibromyalgia. And because we've worked with a bunch of different clients, we have that collective experience of different people trying the same kind of therapy. We also start to get a feel for Which things are good for what personalities? Which things are good for what kinds of symptoms? So if you come to me and you tell me you're having trouble sleeping, I'm going to ask you a bunch of questions, and the answers to those questions are going to help me guide you to the things that are most likely to work for you. Where if you have trouble sleeping and you're just trying things on your own, you're kind of blindly choosing in the dark. So, a lot of times, our coaches can help you, of course, save time because we're giving you all the shortcuts, but a lot of times, even save money because we can direct you to the things that are most likely to work for you, and you're not just trying all the things that don't work for you. All right, so let's just sort of recap all of this. There is always going to be a resistance to change. Everybody feels it. It's just your brain trying to protect you, whether you don't have enough information or you don't feel safe trying something you've never tried before. You're worried about making a fool out of yourself, hurting yourself. Your brain is trying to protect you. So start to think through that question of, what do I need to be ready? What do I need to feel ready? And then start moving through those stages of change. Move from, you're probably in contemplation. We talked about that, but pre-contemplation is first, moving to contemplation, moving into preparation, actually making those plans, researching, getting ready to take action, moving into the action stage where we're actually starting to make changes, thinking about maintenance and how you can sustain those changes over time and how you can prevent that relapse. And then at some point, you just have to start. Remember that whole thing about driving a car, right? The day you get behind the steering wheel, you're not really ever going to be prepared for that. You can't wait until you're well before you start to work on your health, just like you can't wait until you're in shape before you start to exercise. It just doesn't work that way. All right. As we wrap up, I want to give you today's listener shout out. This comes from Laura. She said, I love your podcast. I think what you're doing is so inspiring and wonderful. You've given me fresh hope that I actually might be able to heal. Thank you so much for that, Laura. And that's how I hope every single one of you feel, that you have some fresh hope that you actually might be able to heal. And if you are ready to take action, or if you're in that preparation stage and you want to talk to a coach to figure out if that needs to be part of your plan, then it's super easy. Just go to findafibrocoach.com. And there's an application that you can fill out. After you fill out the application, you'll have the choice of a few different kinds of coaches. There's the VIP private coaching with me, that option. There is Certified Fibromyalgia Coaches. These are our coaches who have completed all of their training, and they are great for our more complicated people with more symptoms, and they just have more experience, so they're more prepared to deal with more complicated things. We also have our student coaches. These are our coaches who have completed all of their lessons in class. They've completed that part of their training. And now, like if the coaching class was driver's ed, they've completed the classroom part and now they're getting behind the wheel. And so we actually are looking for people for our students to practice with. They have to complete 100 coaching sessions before they can graduate, and we would love your help. So this is a great no stress, low cost way to see if coaching is a good fit for you and also help train our coaches. So that option is out there for you. And then we also have scholarship options available for people who can't afford our regular rates. Now, our student coaches and our certified coaches, everybody sets their own rates. They're their own businesses. I can't tell you how much that would cost, but I can tell you that our students are at a significantly discounted rate from what our coaches charge. So if finances are an issue for you, look at those student coach options or even the scholarship options. All right. That is it for today. Thank you so much for being here. And, this is episode 157. Episode 160 is going to be our next Ask the Coach episode. And if you haven't heard one of those, this is like the Dear Tami for Fibro episodes where I actually answer questions that you sent in. So if you have a question you'd like me to answer on the podcast, please send it in to us. You can go to fibromyalgiapodcast.com and you'll see the contact link in the main menu there, and you can send in a question for our Ask the Coach episodes. And if for any reason we don't choose your question, we'll still get you an answer, but I will answer your question live, quote unquote live. I'll record your question and we'll share it for episode 160. See you back here next time. And that wraps up another episode of the Fibromyalgia Podcast. I'm your coach, Tami Stackelhouse. For daily doses of hope, inspiration, and practical advice, come hang out with me on Facebook. Visit facebook.com/fibrocoach to find my personal coaching page and connect with me directly. To find the show notes, additional resources, or to schedule a consultation with me or one of my coaches, visit fibromyalgiapodcast.com.